This week, I'm joined by Mr. Matt Alderman, where we're going to interview James Wickett. He's the head of research at Signal Sciences. In the enterprise news, AlgoSec has an announcement. HP reinvents their customer experience with a partnership with Ping Identity. What mid-market security budgets might look like in 2019, at least one person's opinion, and some acquisition and funding updates from Forescout, Dragos, Netscope, Duality, and more. So stay tuned for all that and more of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs in-command SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. In-command SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see In-Command SOAR live in action. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome to episode 115 of Enterprise Security Weekly for November 14th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. We're on a streak. This is 3 weeks in a row.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, John's been really busy. Well, we know John's been busy being in the business of penetration testing. This is their busy season. I equate it to like accountants get really busy at tax season. For pen testers, like this is their tax season, right?
It is, yeah, really busy. And I love sitting in, so it's fine.
It's awesome. Yeah, we got a lot of great stuff some of the things we've been talking about over the course of the week, Matt and I, Matt is now the CEO for Security Weekly, CTO. We're kind of dividing and conquering as it were on the podcast and security industry and community side. And we've talked a lot about what mostly is in the news this week already, Matt, as we analyze the security industry in many different facets. So,
yeah, this is a really newsworthy week, so it'll be interesting when we get to the news segment. Lots of activity happening, which is great.
Yes. If you're interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations rather than just a badge scan, join us, that's Security Weekly and InfoSec World together, April 1st through the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. You can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. You can use the registration code OS19-SECWEEK for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. James Wickett. He got his start in technology when he founded a startup as a student at the University of Oklahoma. He then went on to hold several positions, do some DevOps training, and is a dynamic speaker as opposed to a boring speaker. He is dynamic on the topics of DevOps, InfoSec, cloud security, security testing, rugged DevOps, and serverless. James, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Thanks for the great intro there.
Yes, nice to have you on the show, James. we started talking about, and it's interesting, I was having some of these conversations with Zane that we did a webcast with, and we were talking about the different approaches and kind of like how we got to where we are today in terms of protecting web applications. So, I mean, let's first start with like where we were years ago. How did we try and protect web applications, and what were some of the things we were doing and not doing and not getting the right information?
Yeah, I think there's a main route that people took when they were first protecting web applications, and that's the the historic or legacy term kind of web application firewall, which is not to be too derogatory toward it, but like that was the approach that we took. We had firewalls solving our network problems in the late '90s, and we said, well, we got these things called web applications, and we got stuff like cross-site scripting and SQL injection, and developers can't fix their problems. So what are we going to do, right? So
It's
we're
true.
going
I feel like it got lumped into firewalls in the like, I'll just put a firewall in front of it and then it's secure. I was like, well, put a WAF in front of it, it's secure, and it kind of, became a joke. And it's interesting that in each of those segments, the individual sub-markets realized that, well, we got to do some things differently and better in order to provide some level of protection. And now we still, like, we have next generation WAFs and next generation firewalls, right, that are adapting to the changes that we see in both in the market and also the way on the WAF side that we develop web applications today.
Yeah, right. Everything's moved to the application space. Everything's moved where now we're dealing with web applications in a way that's fundamentally different than we did 15 years ago. Paul, I think the other thing to mention too is people often found themselves implementing like a network device with like a web application firewall and sort of like a middleman choke point. And then the other way that people implemented application security was also by taking that same detection and prevention, but moving it off-prem and putting in their CDN and somewhere in their caching tier, which I think is also an anti-pattern for how people should protect web applications.
Yeah, I was always curious why that was that. Well, and my guess was like way back in the day when I was designing some architecture, that would come up. And we're like, hold on, you're taking the applications and moving it to all these different places and load balancing it and caching it. And we're like, what about security? And I think the load balancing and CDNs were like, oh, we can just put a WAF in all those different places, right? And you're like, oh, cool. Like I got security. Is that pretty much like how we got there?
Yeah, I also think that what did the CDN solve for us, right? It helped us, deliver assets and help speed things up, last mile type stuff. But there's one of the sneaky things about WAFs was it started getting written into the compliance documentation and other types of requirements. And then you look around and it's like, well, the problems with WAFs is they're generally pretty slow. They break a lot of the traffic. They have a lot of false positives. They're not really built to be kind of put in sort of a developer type system, but we need to have them. And the compliance folks are telling us we got to have it. What could we do? We could have a very loose set of rules combined together, and then move that off-prem away from our application into a CDN provider. And there we go, best of both worlds. We check the box for having a web application firewall, and we don't annoy the developers, and they can keep going at full speed building web applications.
Yeah.
And with kind of the understanding that you're not really protected like you should be, that the rules have to be flexible enough to live at that CDN layer. So it takes off some of the low-hanging fruit, but it really solved I'd say like a political or organizational type problem.
Well, and I think you hit on it, and I don't think many of us now, because we get here in the show so caught up talking about DevOps and DevSecOps, right? If you go back and reflect on how you tried to apply application security before, you used a WAF because if you were to find application vulnerabilities, I think two things. One, in my assessment, I don't have any studies to back this up. I'm sure I could find a study to back up anything I say, right? But I think when we went to developers, the overall awareness and skill level that developers had for identifying and fixing security vulnerabilities, which was much lower 15 years ago than it is today. And that's just a general statement, but that's kind of my general sense. The other thing that I think was different 15 plus years ago, or maybe even sooner, was the way that everyone developed. Mostly it was waterfall development. So if they had just pushed a release to production, their next release was months later. And if you found a flaw, they're like, yeah, like in our next cycle, we can fix that. So we needed something in the meantime because to push a change through took months. So that's why we grabbed it. We're like, oh, and I think, and Zane and I were talking about this, we did a lot of things around the application. Right? We tried to put firewalls and WAFs and anything else we could in front of it, and reverse proxy servers and all that stuff in front of it, and tried to apply security. And then the app was like this big unknown, because if the developer didn't write code in there to spit out any logs or telemetry, we were essentially blind. And so we're like, okay, what's the web server running on? What's running on the app server? I still don't really have great visibility in the app server either, because its logging kind of stinks. But I can definitely do some stuff in the web server. And that's where you might have had the Apache mod security, or looked at your web server logs for some telemetry. And it was so. Your mileage varied. Then we went further down and we said, oh, we can secure the operating system, right? But that piece that we're missing in the middle was the application itself. And Zane made me realize that tools like Signal Sciences and others that are coming out today, we actually now can gain some of that visibility into the application. That was like a huge light bulb going off. I'm like, why didn't I think of it that way sooner, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, putting some instrumentation in your application, that's why it took us so long to get here. I don't know. Well, and the other problem where you mentioned the waterfall cycle, like I think that followed kind of the business way to develop software. And WAFs have the idea that you can put them in learning mode, and you do it for a week or a month, and maybe that's not awesome, but it could work more effectively in a waterfall type scenario. And part of the genesis of Signal Sciences was at Etsy. They're famously pushing 10 deploys a day. This is back in like 2009. It's like we need a web application defense solution or something that's not going to require us to go into learning mode all the time.
Right.
And so the initial version of Signal Sciences was built in-house at Etsy, and that's kind of the reason, like that was the impetus for us to actually build something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also evolved our application testing during that time, right? So we had the web app firewall. We didn't want it in learning mode. We needed ways to test the application. So then we go through the evolution of static analysis, dynamic application analysis, runtime application self-protection, right? We go through iterations on our testing cycle. And at various points, we try to connect the two together. Probably not really effective until I think kind of now when we see the runtime activity and we can infer rules and protections back at the web app firewall, I think we're now at this point of evolution where the web app firewall and the security testing techniques finally can come back together and complement each other, where for a while they were really disconnected in kind of how our pipeline moved.
Yeah, if you were to find a bug and then you had to go write a WAF rule like that, you're right, Matt. That was a really disconnected process. There wasn't a great, it was all manual effort, maybe even contacting your vendor. Like, how does it do that? And then how do you test that is the other thing. Like, I found a vulnerability. I can write the rule, but how do I test it to make sure that it's actually effective? We didn't have the ubiquity that we have with containers today, right? To spin up environments and test stuff, I think, is the other thing. James?
Well, no, and then you also end up breaking stuff for your developers too, right? It's like, oh, I wrote this really sweet regex rule, and it's totally going to fix it. And then, a couple hours later, they're like, people aren't able to check out from the store anymore. And
like if their total ends in a 0, they can't check out anymore. Is that a problem? Hold on, wait.
I mean, I know that it's not my regex. Like that stuff's
right, it's never the regex we write.
I mean, that's the challenge, right? You put somebody in a scenario where they have to write something that they're not able to test, and that kind of takes away that feedback loop. And so, no matter how good of a developer you are, you can't expect to succeed in that kind of environment.
Yeah. And I think, to Matt's point too, the ability that we have to test things now is awesome. I mean, I realized that when we, we're writing our own internal app, and I was like, wow, hold on. I can spin up environments in all different phases of development and do stuff with them and then spin them down. I'm like, we never, like before, even like racking hardware, like a new environment meant like someone had to go into the data center and actually rack something, right? And then as we progressed, virtual machines, and I think we see this in the Phoenix project, and I certainly experienced this in previous jobs as well. Like you build an internal virtual machine infrastructure, but there's only so much capacity. Like everyone wants more servers, right? And IT's going, hold on, wait a minute. You can't go past a certain threshold. Otherwise, everyone's performance suffers. So you still kind of had that problem where someone had to physically go in the data center and rack a new server, put ESX on it, and now you have more capacity. So we still had that issue. It wasn't until I believe in containers where they can just basically run everywhere, and it's the same exact environment, that we had that reproducibility of different environments. And we talked about this with Zane. My example was, when we find a bug in production, we make a copy of production, and then we do our debugging and testing. Because our debugging and testing can break stuff, and I don't want to break the production workflow, but I want exactly what's in production and maybe even the exact same data, because a lot of times the testing relates to the data that we have. So I'll completely clone production, put the same security controls around it because it's another production, do my testing, and then spin it down. If you were to mention that even 5+ years ago, you would have been laughed out of the room as a security, or QA team. Said, well, we just need to make copies of production on the fly. Like you would have been laughed out of the room.
I actually experienced that. It was circa 2011 or so. I was at a security meeting, and I was doing a talk on cloud security. I think 10 people, 15 people came. Like it was very, very small. And but it was back in the days whenever like security folks would use the word cloud in like finger quotes.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, what can I do to kind of help get people excited about this topic? And so I kind of challenged the audience. I said, do you guys have a development and a test and a production environment like that match 100% node for node, firewall rule for firewall rule, network rule for network rule? And no hands go up. And I'm like, well, I don't know if the cloud is more secure or less, but I can say yes to that. And that you can't say yes to that, like that should be a real concerning problem, because a lot of security problems are configuration issues if it's coming from like operation side, or coming in from development side. Even just like we weren't able to test it the way we did in dev as it is in production, a lot of things can be linked back to that. So it was a long time ago, but it was sort of fun. I still can remember that moment. I was like, I think that these people are gonna like crucify me here, so I need to like really challenge them. But it's I think that's totally true, and it's totally inside of security's purview to want environments that match and be able to do that kind of testing. That what you just described is exactly the right approach.
One of the other things that we were talking about, James, that I thought was really fascinating was the focus on vulnerabilities versus what the adversaries are doing, right? And I think there's, in a lot of different segments in security, there's some sharp contrasts between those two. I think I see it more in the Active Directory world, right? Where they're like, yeah, Windows systems need to be patched and not have vulnerabilities. But then you look at what the attacker's doing, they're really preying on a lot of different stuff. I mean, it's a lot of credential misuse in many different forms. It's taking advantage of configuration, whether you're knowingly misconfiguring something or not. And there's a less reliance on discovering like a vulnerability that can be solved with a patch. Or some, in this case, in application security, I need to code so I don't have those vulnerabilities. But the variable that we need to pay more attention to, I think, is what are the adversaries doing, right? And how are they looking at things? So you gave a presentation, I think.
Oh yeah, I did. Shannon Leitz and I. She runs the DevSecOps, DevSecOps.org, the DevSecOps Twitter handle, and she also is, I believe, a director over at Intuit. And we gave a talk together at DevOps Enterprise Summit last month, and we were talking about how adversaries actually interact with your system. And Shannon has done some really good research to try to bucket the types of people, because when we started at Signal Sciences, we came forward with the idea that we'd like to have people answer the question, do you know if you're under attack? Like, right now with any sort of degree of certainty do I know if I'm under attack? And then I think the next level is like, are the attackers having any success? But I think one level deeper, which I think is where Shannon and I are trying to take the conversation, is, do you know what types? Like, do you know the who behind those other statements? Like, what are they trying to do? Because we have a picture of the world, and the picture of the world tells us that attackers are trying to go down this top 10 list for web applications, at least, that of these are the top 10 things that you can fix, and these are the things that attackers are going after. But when you start breaking it down class by class, and Shannon and I help break this down in 4 categories. It's let's say, I think I have them here in front of me just so I don't mess them up too bad. Looking at scanners, just like raw scanning traffic, researchers, so maybe people that are in your bug bounty programs or other type of research. Then there's paid noise that attackers have just put out there, and then the last one is the advanced adversaries. And we have a talk, and a grid that, and Shannon put together a whole experiment on how to isolate these. But they clump in clusters across the graph in different ways that are pretty meaningful, and they're pretty disparate from the way that you would think OAuth's top 10 would actually show. And we see this, every day. I mean, Signal Sciences was used along with a bunch of other great companies and products to kind of put all this research together. But we see this on a regular basis, even when dealing with customers at work, right? It's like someone comes on, the first thing we help for, like out of the gate, like we take all the OWASP top 10, we definitely defend against that. But then we start instrumenting anything inside of the application that's like account takeover related, because those are usually things that are helpful to add that instrumentation, and helps add the correlation and help what people are going after, where they're attacking. So just normal actions inside of an app, like log in, log off, password reset, bad login, those types of things. Those start keying you in on attacks that are going on in your system.
Yeah, and we needed that level of visibility so bad, because
Yeah.
The other alternative that I would discuss with people is, well, what if the developers can implement something inside the application to start tracking some of that bad activity? And like that would have made millions of different iterations of what developers of those specific applications thought was bad behavior. And there was just no way we'd be able to educate people across the board to do that in a consistent manner, nor could we create some kind of standard that they could put in their code, because everyone develops in a different language, in a different way, in a different process. And how do you accomplish that, right? And so that's why we needed that other tool like Signal Sciences to give us that visibility.
Yeah, and it's the knowing the difference between what's bad and even the stuff that's like normally good, but if it's occurring at too high of a frequency, or from different actors from different countries, or they have different, you tag their cookies or whatever. But it's a way that provides that feedback, and yeah, it is an instrumentation of your application. And I think, to bring back to what you said at the very beginning, at the top of the show, right? Applications needed, like the application defense actually needed to reside close to the application, not on some distant caching tier somewhere, or not like as a network proxy device, that some other team owns, but something that developers and security can join forces and instrument together.
Yeah, and I think containers actually help this come to reality, because if we thought about the old monolithic application, I think it was super hard to instrument, right? Because it was doing so many things. But when you break the app up into smaller subcomponents, these microservice architectures, I think it's a little easier now to instrument the pieces and start to understand behavior across those different pieces, instead of trying to model the whole monolithic app. Now I'm modeling subsets of the app. And I think it gets a little easier with containers than it was in the past. And that's where I think we see most of the innovation coming from as we move into these new containerized applications.
Yeah, I'd say that with especially the way people are delivering APIs, the APIs are a lot cleaner, and we're seeing where there's more separation and boundaries between different microservices. I mean, there's plenty of examples, I think, where all that can go horribly wrong, but I think on the whole, yeah, I'd say we're improving, and it's looking at that level of application level defense inside of those APIs or microservices is key.
Now, it's interesting. You talked about monitoring the behavior of an application and separating bad from good. The example that came to mind was a story we actually covered on Application Security Weekly this week, where Valve, which many of us, well, older people like me, played Team Fortress and Half-Life, right? That was Valve, right? But they have a whole, like, gaming's totally different now, and they've got like 100 different games, and you earn achievements. I was struggling to figure out like the context behind this vulnerability. Achievements equate to like points, which equate to some monetary value, something like that. In any case, they had a flaw that essentially, if you sent specific requests, and I think it was a null, I may be confusing it with another vulnerability we covered, but it was like if I sent a null request, it returned to me a whole bunch of information about those player statistics. And it reminded me of what you were saying, James, where you monitor for bad or good. If you could normalize that and say, well, I typically get a request like this, and I see a response with a particular amount of data. And it's when you see one request and then all of a sudden you're like, why is so much data going back out? That's something that'll easily show up on a dashboard like in Signal Sciences. And those things were traditionally very hard to monitor. But here inside the application, we can see those kind of things. And I thought this was a good example of something that you could detect.
Yeah, Paul, where is that on the OWASP top 10?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, and some of the most critical issues are not found there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, where do we see somebody trying to, write a file into a file mount and try to load a new process or fork a process? Where do we see, maybe a new network port being bound for command and control? That's all happening at runtime. That is not happening in code up front, right? And so unless you can see that kind of activity, it'd be really hard to understand how to protect some of these applications.
Yeah, we view it as a three-part system. So, of course, I don't mean to throw OWASP under the bus at all, because it's definitely valuable research. But we instrument for taking that stuff off the table, right? So, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, command execution, whatever. Like, we instrument all that out of the box. Also, like, we look for what we call anomalous type behavior. So, HTTP response code, response body, like you're talking about here, any locations, anything that we can figure out, IP list, reputation list, all that stuff. And then the third leg of this whole piece is what's normal inside of your application, or just like kind of flows or transactions or any instrumentation that we can add. And so once you're able to correlate across all three, you're able to have a better picture of like, are you being attacked? Are they being successful? What kind of adversaries are you facing? You're able to answer some questions that you weren't able to answer before. And one of the crazy things, I know you guys like DevSecOps, so this is a safe space for this, but I was talking to one of our customers the other day in the healthcare space, and they were doing something with our product that I thought was pretty crazy. They were taking crazy in a good way. Like, I was surprised that it was actually happening, but they were taking telemetry and results they're getting back from the product, and then they're using that to prioritize their developer backlog. And like, what bugs do they need to fix? It's like, oh, we've been seeing like more interest in this type of attack base, so we're gonna like spend more time kind of cleaning that bit up. But I thought that was great, like prioritizing your agile sprint based off of like what your security monitoring system is telling you. Like, how cool is that? I think like I never thought I would live to see a day where like security was that ingrained in a DevOps or in a dev like workflow. So it felt really cool to feel that.
Yeah, and it requires us as security people to think about the process a little different, right? That's because the reason they can do that is because they're working with the DevOps teams. They're trying to integrate telemetry and some of that data earlier in the process to educate them, which makes it easier to prioritize when you see real stuff in running production, right? And I think the challenge we've had is we've always kept these pretty much separated. Dev did their thing, and then they threw the code over the fence, and security would do their thing. But this integration of unifying the DevOps and the SecOps teams actually allow you to get to that nirvana, which is great.
Yeah, it's happening, right? It's like, it's happening.
Yeah,
finally.
When and Matt worked for Tenable, right? When I was working in VM, and I would hear how people were trying to deal with severity, right? And when they would base it off of just the base CVSS score rather, I was like, wow, there's so much more that goes into your prioritization, right? And to add in what's actually happening, and not just, as Matt was saying, like development and security are separate. Development's writing code thrown over the wall, and security's going, SQL injection's bad. Like, you need to fix that, and that might be your highest priority, when in fact that's not the case. Like, there might be some other mitigating circumstances that particular type of SQL injection's not going to work, and it's not what's happening actually in production, right? I think a lot of times we forget that, yeah, we can shift left and do all those things, but the app ultimately is running in production and people are attacking it. And so let's prioritize like what people are attacking, how they might attack it, and get that stuff fixed first, which I think, as you said, James, is just awesome.
Yeah.
All righty. Anything else that you wanted to cover, James?
No, I think we covered it. You know, that's been our hope, is to kind of do that. And I think I can provide a link for that, a version of that talk that Shannon and I gave. And yeah, we're excited. I guess maybe can I mention one other thing that I could use some help for? Maybe like your viewers might be able to help us out with.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's this project called Dear Auditor. DearAuditor.org is the URL for it. It's an open source thing that we started working on it at the DevOps Enterprise Forum last May. We had auditors, security professionals, DevOps folks, people from Columbia and ZBA Labs and Microsoft. I was working on this project as well, but Capital One. But we're trying to help bring audit into this DevSecOps movement, and it's written as a love letter to auditors from DevOps, apologizing for not bringing them along for the journey, but focusing on doing it forward. And it's written in kind of a fun way. But we have a DevSecOps risk control matrix, and I'd be really interested to have people that are in the audit community to give us feedback for that. And we're just interested in kind of talking to more folks on that and see how we can help bring in audit and DevOps together. So that's a little side project, but I thought y'all might be interested in it.
Nice. Fantastic. For audience wants to learn more, you can go to signalsciences.com/ESW or PSW. Either one works. ESW works too. So signalsciences.com/ESW. And register for more information about their products. James Wickett, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the Enterprise news for this week. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.